That was supposed to be. Says you're live. We're now live, just in time for the 7 p.m. start, which is about half an hour better than some meetings last year when I hadn't figured out technology. But we make progress. Welcome to this month's talk. I'm your host, Alex Beamish, with the crooked glasses. And we're just going to wait till 7 o'clock, and then Sean will officially kick things off. It's very exciting. Your mic. And I'll plug in.
Let me see, I'm muted. Let's see if that fixes it. Folco, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. It's good right now.
Excellent, thank you.
Take it away, Sean. I'm just wondering.
We're just going to wait a minute.
Okay. I'm going to.
Thank you.
There. Now you're presenting to everyone.
Now comes the fun part. Share this one. Excellent.
Yes, technology is fun when it works.
Starting to get the hang of it.
After like what, 18 months?
All right, let me see.
Who's counting?
Let me see if I can find my hand. Okay, I think we're good to go as long as I can still be heard out there.
All is good.
Excellent.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Folco.
All right, this is a short talk stepping through some Docker Compose, give you an idea of what it is. I didn't prepare anything as an introductory to Docker or anything like that, so we're stepping in with everyone knows what Docker is and has an idea of containers and that type of thing. Yeah, magic. All right, so Docker is a simple command used to start a container. There are options available with many different command line parameters. The ones that are specified on this command are D for detached, I for interactive, and T for assign a TTY. The -- name is assigning a name to a running image. So I can access this container through the name metacpan API. The name of the image is metacpan API latest. I'm using my command line as an example here so you can see why it's this way. And bin bash is what I'm telling it to run when the container starts up. So these options, they do kind of sound contradictory, but the idea is this starts the image, the container, and leaves the container running so that I can access the container even if it happens to crash on build. And excuse me, while I was building some containers, it crashed regularly, and that's why I came up with this, so I could access this. This simple structure, minor options. So running this from a shell script isn't a big deal if you happen to forget some of the options. Oh, and see, I actually went through. If you're running 2 containers, still not too bad to manage. Couple options. I'm running them from the shell with an ampersand in between to make sure they start in proper order. And the same issue, if we had more options, you would use a shell script so that way you could remember what all these options are. What happens when you have more containers? Well, MetaCPAN has 5 different containers. There's 2 Elasticsearches, 1 PostgreSQL, 1 API, and 1 web right now. Excuse me. There are networks involved, 1 for Elasticsearch, 1 for database, 1 for web, and then there are multiple mounted volumes that I couldn't be bothered to go through and count them all because there's that many. All right. But what happens when you have 45 containers? Current project I'm working on has 45 containers up and running. I've had them all running on my laptop at one point in time. That gets to be unwieldy. You're not going to have command line access to start all of these, and nobody's going to remember all the options. The nice thing is you don't actually have to count how many services there are, because Docker Compose will tell you, you pass it config and services options, and it'll list them all out. So I didn't have to count. grep did. So what is Docker Compose? Compose is a tool for defining and running multi-container Docker applications. So again, this takes care of our 45 situation, and we use it for MetaCPAN that takes care of our 5. YAML file is used to configure each of the application services. And it's a single command. You create and start all of your services from that configuration. So an example of a simple Docker Compose. This doesn't actually exist. I just threw it together as an example. It's 2 containers. Oops. 2 containers, web and an API. The version number 3.4 is significant, and it depends on attribute. Automatically starts the API if we only start web. So it doesn't actually wait to see the API is running or anything. It just says if I'm starting the web container, I need to automatically start the API container as well. I mentioned that the version numbers are pretty specific, and so the version number dictates the version of Docker that we're going to be running. Version number 3 would indicate Docker 1.33 and above, which sounds really bad. Version 3.7 indicates Docker engine 1806 and above, which is why 1.33 is kind of bad. They did change numbering schemes partway through.
Are you making this up?
No, there's actually a chart in the Docker Compose documentation that says this version corresponds to this version of Docker.
April 1st is next Monday, right? It sounds, I'm sure there's a hysterical rate for that.
Well, it's indicative of what attributes are available in your Docker Compose file. Health check, for example, is only supported from version 2.1 and above. And mounting read-only volumes is only available from version 3.4 and above. So you do kind of have to pay attention to what is it that I'm trying to do, what version of Docker do I need, and now what version of the Docker Compose file do I need to specify in order to get the proper commands. And recently, Olaf merged a merge request for MetaCPAN for me where I added 3.4 so I could get read-only volumes.
When you specify the number, is that a minimum version?
A minimum version. But you're kind of spelling out like the schema that's used to validate the YAML that you're producing to create the Docker Compose file. So a little bit of a side story. I intended to use Reveal.js for this presentation. I know a number of people who use it. The formatting and code highlighting, they really bugged me. I was having a real hard time getting it to understand Bash shell syntax when I was using continuations, the backslashes, because these lines are so huge. Well, it completely decided it wasn't Bash and wouldn't highlight anything. So I'd rather have syntax highlighting.
So what did you use?
I ended up using DexSet, which is what I always use for presentations. But when I was developing the presentation, I was actually running it inside of Docker. So it was going to be this whole, okay, here's a Docker container that I'm running, and I'm going to build the Docker Compose to get it running and, you know, show off what it is I'm actually doing. It was just too annoying. So I'm still going to tell you how I did it. Because it was worth it. Yeah.
God damn it.
So you can see this is the Docker command that they recommend to run reveal.js inside of a container. There are many volumes here that need to be mounted. There's no way I'd remember all of these. I'd copy and paste it into a shell script, and I'd use a shell script to do this. This image is available up on GitHub if you wanted to, you know, run your own Reveal.js inside of Docker. It does work, as I said. It's just too finicky for me. So we're going to do an exercise. We're going to convert the Docker run command from the previous slide into Docker Compose. So when I do conversions like this, I'm a big fan of I take my command and I paste it at the top of my YAML file, and I'm going to take this command apart and convert it. So I'm actually going to do this here for you.
Excellent.
I commented and delete the bits. I've converted them so that way I don't come back and do them again. So to start off, I'm adding in the required bits, and unfortunately,
The contrast is low. Then.
yeah, the contrast on here is much better.
Oh, it's legible here on the screen.
It's just not up there? Okay.
And it was better before this
Yeah,
black came out.
that's weird. Hey, you give me a second, I'll try a different theme. Maybe. Theme. It's a pity because I actually like that theme a lot. Okay. How's that?
Yeah, that's weird.
It's the same, it's just a different color, so that's good. All right, so I'm going to specify my version number, 3.4. This is the services, so underneath this declaration is where I'm going to say which every service is. Service is a container. And a container is built off of an image. So a lot of people, and myself included, will use these terms interchangeably. But in the YAML file, they're dictated as a service. And I called this service Reveal because it's Reveal.js.
Oh.
So does this end with you sending a pull request
To who?
to the guy with the whoever put the instructions up for with the initial Docker run command?
It could. I can't see why not. That'd be simple. Yeah, here you go. Here's a Docker Compose file to start it. But most people don't run just one container from a Docker Compose file. I have many of them like that, though, because I don't want to remember all these command line switches for a lot of things. So we're going to define the image first. The image is the brown Reveal.js. So we add an image attribute and give it location, and I want the latest version.
Sorry, is it okay if I interrupt?
Yeah.
So this is just going to the Docker Hub, right, and looking for this guy, this person's username and the project name. And is the latest tag like literally the latest uploaded to the Docker Hub
Yes.
for that, or does the author have to assign it like as the latest?
Well, it's tagged as the latest, which is the last one that the latest one they pushed. It's automatic.
Okay.
And I'm surprised that that isn't default.
It is the default.
Okay.
If you don't put a number there or a tag, then you get the default. You can switch
So
this
you
tag
just-
and go with the previous version, And sorry, Olaf and I were discussing how do you pin versions in different contexts. But for something like this, if we were using Postgres for our image, you could tell it, I want Postgres 9.6 there. And it wouldn't install, I think it's 11.3 came out. 11.2 or 11.3 is latest. So you can do that. But there's also other nice things where you can get, I want 9.6 latest, and I think 9.6.3 is the current release. And there's a whole pile of options in tagging, and the best way to find those out is to go onto Docker Hub and look up the image, and it'll tell you what the various tags are. Go has a lot of them too, because there's a lot of small incremental updates. Okay. So next, we're going to define the ports that are in use. Okay. The first, so I'm sorry. I pressed there. The ports are actually up on the line. They're the -P option. I didn't get rid of the Docker run. Actually, I should, and I will. But what we're going to do here is define the ports, and you do that with the ports attribute, and you can list, it's an array, so you can list as many ports as are required from within the container. The first port here is the external listening port, and the second is your internal. In this example, for the presentation, I want to be able to point my browser at localhost port 8000 and have it correspond to port 8000 inside the container. So this way you can mirror the two. It doesn't have to be 8000. I could have said port 80 mapped to 8000. 8000 is what the application expects. And just load localhost and it would show the presentation instead. You can't bind multiple ports as per usual. Yeah.
So does it bind any ports by default? Like, can I by default SSH into a Docker container?
If you have an SSH service running inside your Docker container and you expose the port, Docker will assign a random port number if you don't give it one. Okay, so if you leave off the first 8000 and you only have 8000, it's going to expose port 8000 on a random port. It's usually 3276. I want to say 6 is where it starts at for some reason. But it's that range, and it'll increment based on how many ports are required.
Oh, okay, so I just have to list like 22 or whatever under ports.
Yeah.
And it'll just do the right thing.
If your image is running SSHD that's listening internally, normally you don't SSH into a container.
Okay, so what do you do?
You use Docker exec, the container name, /bin bash.
And that gets your command line.
That connects in command line, and you're in the container running a command.
Interesting.
We can actually, let me finish
Yes,
this.
I'll stop interrupting you.
No,
This is
please.
an interesting tangent because I was wondering exactly the same thing. Because when you're setting up a VM type thing, the thing I always wanted to do was SSH in there and start looking around and trying things.
Yeah. So for anyone who used Vagrant, that would have been like the obvious way.
Right. So this isn't a long talk. I have 7 more slides.
We'll get longer.
But that was, and I'm bringing it up because that was my intention. I
Yeah.
wanted to spark some conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do this more conversationally. My hope was someone else would bring in presentations on Docker, Kubernetes, but that's fine.
Mine too.
This way we can get this going, and then, I have many containers running on this laptop that I can, some of them I can show, and we can go through and, I can show some commands and how you actually interact with Docker and stuff like that, which I think will be nice to do. So I've grabbed the ports definition from the run command, and I'm going to get rid of it. So clean up. What I'm left with here is a whole lot of volumes. So we're going to define a volumes attribute, and this is where we list off. It accepts an array. I'm going to pull all of these in. And I think I went backwards. There we go. Excuse me. So this is the first volume. It's a link to the index.html. And, excuse me, on the Docker command line, the volumes are defined by source, colon, and the destination. The destination here is where the application inside the container is expecting the presentation to be. So whoever built this container, and I'm sorry, I apologize to the author as well, I should have got his name. It is expected in reveal.js.index.html. And if there's a web server that looks for that location and deals with it, it also watches for refreshes of it. So if you save it, it'll refresh and build it dynamically and stuff.
Is it named Neil, right?
Is it Neil?
It's the image you're loading.
Well, it's N. His name is Neil, though. I did put that up.
I think that there is a Neil. I've seen the name of it before.
It could be. Okay, so the syntax that is here for defining the volumes, this is called expanded syntax, sorry. I like it better because it's easier to read and I can define more options on the command line to the volume that you don't get with the source colon destination. That is allowable here as well. That's the, I think it's the older, but this is more explicit for me. So the type is bind because I'm actually specifying a file. So I'm telling it just link this one file through instead of telling it that I have a NFS service or I have a directory that is going to be like my Postgres data directory, which would be a volume instead of a type bind. Source. There we go, bind. So that's bind. The source is my local directory index.html. Now, Docker Compose does support environment variables, so I could have ported the $pwd and put it there, but why would I? It's in the same location as the Docker Compose file by default, so it is the current directory. Just give it the /.
Don't have to run the Docker command from that directory.
Right.
So it's more accurate.
And then the target is the destination where it is going to, where the file is expected, just as I said before. And I'm going to mount it here read-only because I don't want the container to change it. I'll change it from my editor on my host computer. I'm not going to jump into the container and start editing the file. I have that option if I want it, but
Okay, and sorry, what happens if you do try it?
it's read-only. So Vim will complain and say it's a read-only file.
Also, the file itself is read-only, not like the whole file system.
You can do the whole file system and mount it as read-only if you wanted to.
So if you, is everything read-only, or can you rename the existing one and create another one with the original name?
I have not tried that. So you're saying two different sources as index.html, but two separate targets, and one of them being read-only and the other one being.
I meant if you were inside the container,
Mm-hmm.
you can't edit the file that's there.
Right.
But can you rename that file and create a new one in its place from within, or is even the directory it's on, is that even read-only? Is that read-only as well?
The directory doesn't get mounted here. It's specifically the file. So you can't, even if I rename the file, the container won't see it. It only sees that index.html. If I had a directory mounted, I could do anything within the directory. But if it's marked read-only, that is read-only. But it'll see file changes from externally, if you follow that.
Yeah, I was thinking if you're internal, let's say in Bash, and you did move reveal.js index.html to .back, and then you copied it back to create a read-write version, and then edited that one.
Well, you couldn't move it because the move would require you to be able to write it, right? You can't move a file that you can't. You can copy the file.
Oh, but
You need right on the director.
Right.
So you can remove a file even if you can't write it.
No,
As long
it's
as
been a
you
long
have
time
right-
since
right
I've tried
permission of
doing
the
that.
director.
I don't know what Docker will do in that case. It
Yeah.
may get upset
When
because
it's a mount kind of thing, that's not necessarily.
that's a weird one. But the directory reveal.js is writable. You could go in there and create new files and do whatever. Just you can't touch that file.
Like, I can see there being a use for a copy on write kind of thing, where the the index dot whatever file starts off with the value that is in the original, but if you overwrite it, it's only on the local copy, and it doesn't affect the original file.
Yeah,
It's
I
only the
could see
copy
that.
inside the container.
I've never tried it. That's interesting.
I don't know if they've got support for that sort of thing. It's kind of a weird one, but
Mm-hmm.
There are file systems that have that kind of local, this version here, but the old one is still around, and it's just the local changes.
Got a question from Antonio. He asked, is there any other files under /reveal.js folder within the Docker? I.e., what would happen if we do only a single volume mapping from .reveal.js into .reveal.js folder within the Docker?
There are other files within there. If you can see the third line down from the top where it's mounting the custom CSS.
Yeah.
So that's any CSS that's going to override my theme that I choose. But all of the themes are actually within that theme directory. So there are other files there.
And the second line, you've got the reveal, the media file or directory.
So that's an external that I can put pictures in or video.
So reveal.js is a directory that's inside the Docker container.
Yes.
There might be other things that work inside the Docker container, and then these are mounted
Inside.
additionally as part of starting it up.
Yeah. So that I can
they're
override.
visible, but they aren't.
Yeah.
This sort of
and
standard
somewhat
that.
weird in terms of you could mount files and not just whole directories.
Mm-hmm. But this makes it useful because I have one image now that has a Docker compose file. I have the whole file next. But I can take that file and create more presentations from it, and I don't have to change anything. And the image is already built. So when I go Docker compose, and I'll get there too, Docker compose up in this new directory, it's not going to rebuild the whole image. It's just going to start a new container off the image and mount new points.
Yeah. Sounds very useful for versioning kinds of things where you just mount version 123 as config file. And so the program runs with config file. It just happens to get the right version because that you can choose when you set it up. And
the Meta CPAN images, they actually have mount points for a carton directory and, well, we'll stick to the carton directory. So that way when you start the image up and the application first launches, it runs carton exec, and that'll install all the Perl modules that are required. And they go into a hosted directory. The next time you start it up, it doesn't have to reinstall all of those. They're available locally. But I'm going to also take that file and preload the carton directory with all of the modules I need, and then start the container, and that'll speed up the startup of the container. It doesn't have to do all that downloading again. It allows us to move stuff around. Containers can be moved around and be reused a lot easier. So this is the whole Docker compose file after everything's converted. It's a bit of an eye chart, but it really is just repeating the volume lines over and over again to match what was in the original command.
Yeah.
There's no changes other than the source and target. So I didn't feel the need to step through all of these. The bottom one there is a Markdown directory I'm actually mounting there, and that's so that way I could write my presentation in Markdown. So I mentioned some commands, and we'll take a look through a couple of the ones you use most. So Docker Compose up, it starts your containers and logging. If you don't give it the -D option, which is to run in detached mode, it starts it in the foreground, and you get all of the logs that would be displayed. Yeah, it's basically syslog writes to standard out, and you get everything there and you can watch it as it's going. The downside is now to do anything with that Docker container, you have to open up another window and access the container. So you started with the -D option, and that runs in the background, pretty much like everything else. Docker Compose down is to remove your containers. So it'll stop and remove the networks. What it doesn't do, though, is it does not remove any of your persistent volumes. So if you were to say you have your databases in a container, which I still don't recommend, but you can do it, and I have done it. You specify this is a volume that I'm going to mount as my storage, persistent storage. If you down do a Docker Compose down, and I'll explain something else in a minute. Docker Compose down without the -- volumes option, that persists. So your database, you can restart it again and still have the data you had before. If you add -- volumes, it'll kill that data, and it's like you're starting over again from scratch, which is really useful if you're doing development and you can actually recreate your database on the fly. And this goes back to using Skitch, which is another topic to discuss. Because, yeah, you can bring up your volume, run Skitch, and it'll build your database, and then you continue on. Database management. Yeah, database change management is there.
But so that translation is fairly straightforward to automate.
Yeah, that one isn't too bad. Yeah, you could automate that one pretty easily. But some of the others that like the 45 container one, yeah, it's a little hectic. And the nice thing is, and I have another talk about this that I'm saving for September. YAML actually allows you to reuse definitions. So a lot of these volumes, and especially in the 45 container one,
Fill a back of some sort.
yeah, so you can keep calling back to the same bit of YAML without having to redefine it over and over again and change it in one place. It's really nice that way. So stops the containers but leaves them intact. So you can just start them back up again with start. Another command, hey, good, I got it, is log. So after I've started a container detached, I can ask for a log of any one of the container services, and it'll start displaying the log from it. You can add a -f option that supports just like tail, and it'll continue the log running. You got to Control-C to get out of it. It's pretty handy that way. Now, I said I was going to come back to this. Docker Compose was originally called Fig, F-I-G, which is a lot less typing and a lot easier to say than Docker Compose over and over and over again. So the 45 container project, they recommended, you know what, use Fig, create an alias, save your fingers. I recommend it also. It's much easier.
Why was it called Fig? You know?
No, I don't. All I know is Fig Up is a lot shorter.
Yeah.
And further reading is the Docker Compose documentation. The documentation is excellent. It has all kinds of resources. It goes through what's involved in each of the different versions and what their definitions are, and tells you when things are available. So that's it.
So Compose is a Docker utility as opposed
Yes.
to separate.
You have to install it separately. It doesn't come when you install Docker. There are installation instructions on the Docker website on how to get it. Linux boxes, a Debian-based apt-get install Docker Compose works. I think it's been so long now. I think Brew installed it on the Mac for me. Don't know about Windows. It exists for Windows. I just don't know.
You're not using the GUI Docker on your Mac?
Yes, but I don't use it. I use it from the command line. I use yeah.
I just wondered if Docker Compose was automatically installed with the Docker for Mac.
You know what? Let's exit out of here. Do you see it? I do. There it is. That one you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
No, I think I've installed it separately. I know I have coworkers who swear they don't like this version, that it's too heavy, and they've installed a Vagrant VM running a lighter weight Debian image, and then installed Docker inside of it, and that's where they run their containers. Because this is a Vagrant VM running Docker on Mac OS X.
Yeah, that's why it's so heavy.
Yeah, and if you go into the preferences, all right, it's going to show here. Good. Oh, the problem is I don't have my glasses. All right, so if we go into the advanced tab, you can see this is a VM. Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to specify how many CPUs, the memory, the swap file I want.
Is it using VirtualBox?
I believe so. Right, and you're sharing disks, you're sharing files, and yeah, it's a VM. It would make sense that it would be VirtualBox because open source, right?
It's really hard to keep track of what's going on where.
It gets that way, yeah. Remind me later because I don't care. Still don't care.
Was this a local section or is this?
This is just my iTerm, so it's just a locally running terminal.
I thought you use that term.
I don't, but I do for presentations. All right, so this is the MetaCPAN Docker project. I think. Okay, I have no containers running currently. So MetaCPAN Docker implementation has a shell script that actually runs Docker Compose under the hood and sets up the Compose files, so the Docker Compose builds. It's actually split into two Compose files right now. One's called local API and one's Docker Compose. You can actually see it. These are the two files right here. That's the local API, and this is the regular one that just runs the web. I want to change this, but anyway, that's what it's doing inside under the hood. And if I run this, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Anyway, I had the -- build option, which is telling it go out and rebuild all of these images. So it's going through and building up, and this is running in the foreground, as you can see. And these are the error logs or sys logs that are coming off of the containers as they're starting up. Plaque Runner had some issues.
You pull in the latest.
That's fixed?
That was the term size that you.
Ah, cool. So now this is up and running. And as I said, it didn't start in the background, so I'm stuck with this now. But the nice thing is I can just add the -d so it'll run patched. Maybe not. So we're going into another terminal. PS. A liar on me. So when I mentioned about wanting to combine, oh, I know what it is. Can't remember the syntax of it. This is why I have so many shell scripts in Docker Compose. Okay. So as I said, MetaCPAN is using the two Docker Compose files, and the two get merged together into one, and that's how Docker Compose builds all of these services. So the -f is telling it where my Docker Compose files are. Multiple -fs tell it all the different files. And so now I can actually run Fig. I have to give it both files instead of one. So Fig PS, you can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4 containers running. Although they stated that they're with an exit code of 0. I don't know why.
What is the specific to MetaCPAN? Is it running under MetaCPAN or for it, or to do it, or what's?
This is for developers to be able to work on MetaCPAN locally. So I can actually run MetaCPAN on my laptop and do everything I need to do, deal with the API.
Or you got PG running?
No.
The port was
This is why I want to fix it. So what I did was shut down the version that was started from the shell script, yeah, and restarted it under Fig proper or Docker Compose proper. Now I can actually communicate with it. It does use port 5432, so I can talk to Postgres directly here. That talks into my Postgres container. Port 5000 is exposed, 9200 for Elasticsearch. The name of the system that's running is on the left here. The command that it's running is in the middle. So you can see Docker Red is actually running carton exec plaque up. The fun part here is the MetaCPAN API is running wait for it, DB5432. So what this does is a simple shell script that just tries to communicate with the database container, which is this one here, on port 5432. And until it can, it just sits and waits and then start the application. So the interdependency between the containers.
And the Postgres container has a health state because it has a health check.
Yeah, I added a health check script to it, and the health check script just every second goes and says to the Postgres container, are you okay? Right?
And will it restart after a certain number of failed attempts?
Yeah, you can tell it to. I haven't done that. That is the idea. These are Docker containers on the pathway to Kubernetes, because it's Kubernetes that's going to look at the healthy and say, okay, this has gone unhealthy, build me a new one.
So can you just convert that health check? Is that like a drop-in replacement when you switch to Kubernetes? Like, is it the same syntax for the health checks?
Yeah.
Or will it run the Docker health check? Or
this is just the shell script.
Oh, okay.
And it's going into the database and running select one. So the database is responding. It's not just a port check, it's actual database in behind. So what other fig goodness? Okay. So yeah. If I want to get into the Postgres, and bash. Now I'm inside the Postgres container. There's my health check script that's actually mounted read-only. Oh, can't rename. So that answers that question. You cannot rename a bound file. Anything else we want to try? The good thing is, you mess anything up, I just fig up build, and it'll rebuild them from scratch, and I don't need to worry.
Question on it.
Yeah. Oh, let's see. Do I have Vim? No. Do I have? Yes, I have DI. Yeah. So, as I have permission, but
It might have not been run.
it should be read-only. I'll check his read-only. You can tell how often I run straight VI instead of Vim, right?
Are you not running as root?
I think you are.
I'm root.
Still can't touch the hash.
Permissions say root has root.
Yeah. So it's the underlying Docker infrastructure isn't allowing it.
Well, this is treating it more like a mount, like a traditional Unix, folder mount, in which case even root can't change that.
Well,
I guess
you can't get
Sadly.
at the folder that was mounted over you. You can access the folder that was mounted. But it's the root of the mounted file.
if you can't unmount a busy.
You can create things in it and change its name because its name is slash. there's no rename on slash in the syntax.
I don't remember where it is. Oh, that's application. Anyway, this is the API server. So I can easily get in. The same command gets me in. Exec, name of the container, and then what it is you want to run. So to do something. Run
That's
ls.
runs the one command and comes back.
Yeah. For the database container, screw that up.
Dash lowercase u. Yeah.
Well, that's your user.
Oh, you're trying to load the
Yeah, I was going to connect to the database, but I don't think it's called MetaCPAN now that I think it's MetaCPAN API or something. I can get in with I just wanted to show you can run any command that you have access to from the command line, and that
Yeah.
shows, I'm running PSQL inside the container, but accessing it from my terminal screen.
You can run health check.
Yeah, I could run health check as well. And, things still exist here. Postgres. Postgres user. So I can PSQL from here and then get into shell. And I was right, there is no minion.
Well, who else is in the Postgres?
Oh, I love Postgres.
Wonderful.
So if there's anything else you want me to show off in Docker, I can. If not, I'm out of ideas.
You probably got a couple of, are they called containers?
Yes.
I'm just wondering, because you mentioned before that these containers are quite small. You would just show us a listing of some of the containers you've got. I'm just curious to see how small they really are.
Let's see. I don't know if this is actually convenient. Okay. Well, these ones aren't overly small. The Postgres one is the smallest at 38 meg.
Grief, it's ridiculous.
I have a feeling these ones are, this one, 2 Elasticsearches at 547. They've got the application embedded.
Yeah.
I have a feeling these are so big because they have Perl modules. And
Yeah.
Perl modules take up a lot of space. But you can see here, so Postgres is from the Postgres repository. It's running 9.6, running on Pine Linux. These are images that are actually built off of.
So do those Elasticsearch images come from Elasticsearch?
Yeah, they're official Elasticsearch images.
Cool. Right.
It's the same. The Postgres is an official Postgres image.
Yeah.
The MetaCPAN, I'm going to show off this one. MetaCPAN API is from this Docker file. There. So the MetaCPAN API is built from a Perl 522 image. And then as part of its build, it is copying the wait for it script. It copies the CPAN snapshot file, creates a working directory called MetaCPAN API. It runs some apt-gets to do some
Module installs.
prerequisite installations. Things like rsync, libgmp. I'm not sure familiar with that one. What is that?
Is that for graphics?
I was thinking it was GIMP, but
Yeah, maybe it's got some development files in there that we need for parsing XML or something. I don't know.
So then we use CPM minus to install CPM. I know why that is. CPM does, if you're not familiar with CPM, it's another CPAN module installer. It understands CPAN file and CPAN file.snapshot, which is really nice. But on top of that, it runs in parallel. So when you have a long list of modules that needs to get installed, it figures out the prerequisites in order and does the installations in parallel. So it's a lot faster. Yeah, highly recommended.
Yeah, for some work stuff, it took some installations down from like 7 minutes to 10 seconds.
Yes. Wow. Really helpful.
Yeah, where you can build dependencies.
So then we're adding a user, making a couple directories, then it's doing the CPM install of everything in the CPAN snap files into carton. Then it's cleaning up temporary stuff. It's not needed in the image. It sets up user permissions on the directories, tells it which volumes it's going to mount, what user it's going to run as, what port it's going to expose. That's the startup command to run the API.
And Docker just creates that user?
Well, no, we added it here. User add.
Oh, okay.
But that tells it when the container starts up, I want to be this user. So if you saw when I ran fig exec on that, I was in as the MetaCPAN API user, not as root.
But these, like the app stuff, the stuff that gets installed, that's after the container started, wasn't it?
No. Oh, yes and no.
Ah,
This is where it's fun. So we start with an image. So what happens is Docker's go out, it's going to pull down the Perl 522 image. It's going to run some commands. Then it's going to do the run command. When the run command completes, it finishes that image and cuts an image. Then it launches that image in a new container and runs the next run command.
So it's building up and tearing down images for each
Constantly
run?
until it gets to the end. And at the end, there's one image that's left up and running. It's interesting the way it does that. And if you notice here, like, why would I not have multiple run commands here, right? And there's all these ampersands. Like, this is ugly. Why is somebody writing all of this? Well, because the ampersands all make it run in one containered image. If I have multiple run commands, at each stage, it's going to launch another container. So you're constantly building and building and building and building. Having it run this way creates a smaller container. Never would have thought it. But yes.
Right, because you're installing a bunch of stuff which creates those temporary files. So your last line there is getting rid of all the temporary files because you don't need them anymore.
Yeah.
And then once that completes, then you started with whatever 200 megabytes or whatever, you've blown it up to 800, and now you've cleaned it back down to 500. And you want, whereas if you did individual files, you'd have to go through a lot of. I guess you could get it down, but it might not recycle the disk space efficiently.
Yeah. It's much better to do it all as one run command. The fewer run commands, the better. And you can see here we're cleaning out cpan minus, we're cleaning out CPM, we're cleaning out apt. All stuff we don't need anymore because it's already included in the image.
So is the logical next step here to like push some stuff to Docker Hub, like the containers?
That is on my list. On my list would be to start, well, I'll figure that out. But yes, I want to publish actual MetaCPAN images on Docker Hub so they're just downloading.
That would help with MetaCPAN development, I'm guessing.
Yes. The only difference is when we looked at the sizes of the images, right? For me to download this text file is rather small. I can pass that around. But once I start building the image, then it's going to download bits and pieces, and it'll eventually build up to this 996 megabytes.
And do you use Docker like in tandem with your continuous integration? Like,
yes.
Can you talk about that a bit? Like how does it fit in? Like, do you have like, say, you merge something into master, all the tests pass, do you automatically ship a new image, or?
You can.
Like say for MetaCPAN, how would we do that? Like, can we do that with Travis to keep the images up to date?
The recommendation is not to do it with Travis. It's to have Docker Hub build it in that case. If you're using GitHub Travis, then you use Docker Hub as your registry.
So Docker Hub will pull the repo and run all
the builds. And it'll do your image build, and then it'll store the image. GitLab, you can actually put it as part. Like GitLab handles it all. You can store your source code in it as a Git repository. The CI/CD will actually do the Docker image builds and then put it in your repository if it passes all of the tests, and then you can download from there as well.
Okay, how about a deployment?
Yeah, that's the next step. Got to figure that out. Well, there is a fig pull command, Docker compose pull. So you'd actually say, okay, you know what? I want to update all of this. So pull the latest images and then rebuild them. That's some Kubernetes when you do there's an upgrade command. When you tell it to upgrade, it'll go out and pull the latest images and build and then do the comparisons. Everything's okay. Shut the old one down. Start the new.
And can you have that just automate that as soon as the
as soon as the image is done?
Available?
You'd have to hook into your CI somehow. So there's got to be some trigger. I think you're looking for the trigger, right?
Okay. How would Ansible fit into all of this?
You could do it with Ansible too. There is a provisioner for within GitLab to execute Ansible at the end of your pipeline. So you can actually say, okay, I've passed, here's my tests. My tests are all good. I built the images are all good. Images go into my repository. That's all good. Ansible, go ahead and deploy. And then you'd have a playbook. Run that playbook and it would go through and do it.
Okay, and then specifically in the case of MetaCPAN, where there's a whole bunch of logic in Puppet right now. So let's say we convert everything to Docker containers. Like, does the logic stay in Puppet?
No, it's all gone.
Ansible, or does it go straight into the Docker?
It's all in the Docker files.
There's a lot of that make for Docker files, or use like shell scripts.
No, this is it. I don't have to do anything.
Right, but I'm saying like right now, Puppet, creates a ton of users. It copies over their SSH keys.
That's different. That's user management for the system, the server itself. Yeah. That has nothing to do with the application. The application, everything the application does runs inside this container, and that's all that's required to make it run.
Okay, so but you have the containers. Like let's say you've got a container for the MetaCPAN front end or whatever.
Yeah.
At what point at what point does all the stuff that Puppet does now, where does that happen in the chain of things?
So that type of thing you're talking about, so you're talking about creating your user, my user, everybody else's user, giving them permissions to do. Okay, you still need user management. Yeah. That's outside because we're going to SSH into the box itself and look at Docker. So we need those permissions. But you're no longer creating the MetaCPAN user. You're no longer creating startup scripts. You're no longer creating, installing all the Perl dependencies. You're not, none of that is there anymore.
Okay, so like you've got the running, say you got container version 1.
Yeah.
And you've upgraded to container version 2. So you pull container version 2 down, you run the Ansible scripts on that, and then you take version 1, then you bring version 2 up and take version 1 down, or
you could do that.
How does that work?
That's what Kubernetes does.
Right. But without Kubernetes?
Without Kubernetes, it's more, you could do it that way, but you would take down one and bring up.
How do you do it seamlessly?
Yeah, that's the problem.
There's no load balancing. Just Kubernetes.
Part of what Kubernetes will do for you. Now, having said that, there are other containers. Traffic is a front end, and we haven't discussed front ends for these things yet. Traffic is like Nginx. It's entirely written in Go. It understands containers. So you can actually say, okay, I'm bringing this container up, and I want it to listen on this domain or full host. And it does all the routing through the networking inside of Docker for you. So you could say, okay, you know what? Bring up this container. It's the version 2 container. I want to access it through version 2 to make sure everything's okay. Okay, everything's okay. Now switch it over. And that's your proxy server controlling that.
Okay, so that makes sense. Now, with the way that we're running things, do we no longer care about it, like init scripts and things like that?
Exactly. If you reboot the box, it automatically starts up with Docker. So when the Docker starts when the box reboots on its own, Docker handles it.
Just the one init to bring up Docker.
That's correct.
Yeah, that's a lot less messy.
And that's a lot of the reason why people are moving toward the containers, because they're disposable.
Looks a lot cleaner, a lot less stuff to fiddle with.
And do you use, like, say if you're working on some open source stuff, do you like just spin up a Docker container to have an environment to work in, like just a clean environment for some?
I can if I want. A lot of the times what I'm doing, I'm using Carton. And I use PLENV and Carton. So if I'm doing Perl stuff, it's their own version of Perl, and they get their own modules, and everything's separate, and I don't have to worry about them crossing.
Right, but I guess if you're, like, you're writing a Vim plugin and you want a specific version of Vim that you don't have installed.
Yeah, you can do that with. If I was running a Linux box, I'd be more apt to reach for Docker more often, because in Linux it's built in. On OS or Mac OS, it's inside that VM. And when that VM gets going, I notice it. But I've run Vagrant and had one running and noticed it, and then I've had 16 containers running and not had a problem. Docker containers are a lot lighter than a Vagrant instance.
Are the Docker resources, so if you've got a container, and I think the processes in it are using memory and other resources, can those shrink back down dynamically, or is it?
Yeah, it's not like when you assign resources to Vagrant, those are carved out of the operating system, and that's what they get, and you can't get those back, right? Docker just uses the shared resource on a Linux box.
But if you've got something running in a container, at some point it peaks some memory use, and then its actual current requirements is less than that. Does it actually free it up to the host OS?
Because you're not virtualizing the host, you're still using the same kernel. It's a lower level of sharing, right? Lower level of virtualization than a virtual machine, to look at it that way, because it's the same kernel you're running.
So it doesn't have to do its own set of memory mapping.
No. It doesn't deal with any of that. That leaves that to the kernel. There's an excellent talk, and I shared it last month at the bar. I think I shared it with you as well. It's a go-to talk. The go-to conferences, I've watched a number of them, and the topics are generally really good. But this one, I can't remember her name. She stood up in front and she built her own implementation of Docker in Go on stage in, I think it was an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes. And she's just writing the code as she's going and steps through. And for one, it solidified how Docker works to me, watching her do that, but also showed what Go can do, actual low level Go is as a programming language. Yeah, exactly. I can look it up.
Posted.
Yeah, I shared it last meeting with Indy and Alex Case. Yeah, I'm just trying to think if I have it handy and nowhere that I can show.
Okay, well,
I will get it and I'll post it to the mailing list because it is that good of a talk to watch.
That sounds fascinating.
Some months when we've got a very, very short talk.
Put this video on and watch it and go, oh my God.
It really is interesting.
Right. Oh, you. Video. Watch the mailing list. Okay. Thanks, Sean.
No problem.
I have no idea what we're going to do next month, but something will come up.
are there any questions from anyone online?
No,
No,
I
they
asked
said they
already.
were all good. I'm gonna stop sharing and mute myself.